The DNA identification for victims of that highway fire tragedy is expected to kick off any time from now at the Chiromo mortuary. Those who believe they lost relatives in the accident have been urged to present themselves at the mortuary, where pathologists will take samples for matching. Chief Government Pathologist Johansen Odwor will lead the exercise as the death toll now rises to 43 today after more casualties succumbed to their injuries at the Nairobi and Kenyatta National Hospitals. The DNA results are expected to be out within 2 weeks, when bodies which will have been identified will be released to their families. To understand more about this DNA sampling and the process of identification, I'm now joined on phone by Dr. Joseph Ndungu, who is a pathologist here in Kenya. Daktari, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Newsdesk today. So there's a lot of, understandably, anxiety amongst family members and wanting to be done with this process. They're being told by the government that the DNA identification process will take 2 weeks. Could you explain to us what that process entails in a rather simple way for our viewers to follow?
Yes, DNA material is actually what makes up the gene of an individual. And in simple terms, what DNA matching means is that you get a specimen from a close relative to the deceased, and then you get another specimen from the body of the deceased, and you try to match the two, because the DNA of the deceased and that of a close relative will have some resemblance, and that will assist in the identification.
All right, and this is a process that takes 2 weeks. Relatives are asking the government if this could happen sooner. They obviously want some closure and to finish off with this process as quickly as possible. How long does the process take?
The process takes a while because, like here in Kenya, not many laboratories are able to do DNA matching. And we only have some few labs doing DNA matching. One of them being the government chemist, and a few private laboratories that are able to do DNA matching. Sometimes this service is normally outsourced, especially mostly by the private labs, where you find them sending specimens outside the country, and that's why sometimes it takes a while to do the matching.
All right, so a process of 2 weeks, does that sound fairly accurate to you? I mean, the process itself, without considering outsourcing, how long does the process of DNA identification or DNA matching take?
The shortest I've seen it taking maybe a week, and 2 weeks looks practical to me. Looking at all everything involved, I think 2 weeks sounds quite practical.
All right, Daktari, let's talk about some of the bodies that we heard were burned beyond recognition. This DNA matching is able to identify those samples as well that, that have been burned. Is that going to be practical for those victims?
Yes, DNA matching is actually the best for identifying bodies that have been mutilated or even have been burned beyond recognition, because you are getting a sample, a very small sample from either muscle or bone. I believe even in those who are burned beyond recognition, they can still be able to get a piece of bone which can be used for DNA matching.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, just as we close our discussion, this is a fairly expensive process. So what does it mean when the government actually takes this up? I mean, just to imagine what sort of cost the families would have to incur if they were doing this on their own. This is fairly expensive, isn't it?
Yes, DNA matching is a fairly expensive test, because the cheapest it would go for one sample, maybe we are talking about 20,000 Kenya shillings, and if you're going to match the deceased plus a relative, then we are talking about anything between 40 and 50,000, which could be far beyond what many Kenyans can afford.
Thank you very much for that. It's a good thing that the government is taking care of that cost. Dr. Joseph Ndungu, who is a pathologist, we thank you for your time.